Tonight's program is going to last about 1 hour. We're going to start with readings and end with some conversation. And we invite you to participate by adding questions to the Q&A feature as we go, if you'd like. And we're extremely fortunate tonight because not only are we joined by 3 powerhouse poets, but we also have a very special guest host. Lisa Pegram is a writer, educator, literary publicist, and an editor with a mission to amplify and celebrate the voices and stories of BIPOC authors. With over 20 years in the field of arts and literature programming, she had the brilliant idea, and no one is surprised by that, to pair up tonight's poets, and we're so glad that she did. So Lisa, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. So glad to be working with you again. We were really fortunate to feature Lisa as a poet 2 years ago for our poetry festival. And Lisa has continued to be a really wonderful friend to the museum since then. So Lisa, welcome again. And can you tell us what excites you about the group of poets that we're going to hear from tonight?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I am super excited about these poets because when I heard about this series, the Phosphorescence series and the concept behind it, again, as you said, this notion of a divine spark, illuminating light, I felt like these poets embody that in their work, in their spirit, in the people that they are. So this was, I always say I love to set a table. And so when I thought of that concept, these 3 poets are the ones that came to mind. The other thing I want to say is that this evening is going to be, in my view, a meditation on the power of creative community, sisterhood, and Black sisterhood. I say that because, okay, so what brought us here is this. I met Shawna at the Tell It Slant Festival at the Dickinson Museum. All of us have about a half a degree of separation between us anyway, but I officially, and Shawna and I also are family already because we both were published by Central Square Press. So I already knew her work, but sharing space together the first time was at the Tell It Slant Festival. And I was so blown away by her work that I just made a note to myself that whenever there was an opportunity for me to try to shine a light her way, I wanted to, because I think her work is just gorgeous. So we connected after the event, stayed, in touch. And so when this came up, I immediately thought of Shawna. Tara, I met at AWP. Here we go again, another literary event, right? So we met at AWP at a Cave Canem reading and struck up a camaraderie then, and have been sisters in poetry and everything else ever since. And Saida, I met through Terry Cross Davis, who has also been featured at the Dickinson Museum. And good people lead you to other good people. And so it has been an incredible honor this year for me to meet Saida as a person, the work that she does in the world, and just the fabulous person she is, but also her work is wonderful. So when I think about a divine spark and illuminating light, this is it. This is the table that's set. The last thing I'll say is that I imagine that Emily Dickinson would be quite pleased to sit down at a table for an evening with these ladies. So I'm going to conjure that that's what we're doing. we have opened the space for Emily Dickinson to sit with these radiant poets tonight in this space that has been created in honor of her legacy.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was beautifully said, and you are such a convener. And thank you for being our convener. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's lineup, and we're going to begin with Dr. Tara Betts. Dr. Tara Betts is the author of Break the Habit, Arc and Hue, and the forthcoming Refuse to Disappear. In addition to working as an editor, a teaching artist, and a mentor for other writers, she's taught at several universities, and she's the inaugural poet for the People Practitioner Fellow at University of Chicago, an artist in residence at Northwestern University's English Department, and founder of Whirlwind Learning Center. Her poetry has appeared in numerous anthologies and journals, including the Breakbeat Poets, Essence Magazine, and Poetry Magazine. And today she tunes in from Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Tara. So great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I also want to thank Lisa Pegram and my fellow poets, Shauna and Saida. And I would be remiss if I did not thank my students who let me bow out to do this, and they're watching it on Zoom here at DePaul. And my boss and colleague, Michelle Morano, who's a wonderful nonfiction writer, who's sitting in with them. So
thank you to your students for letting us borrow you away, and hello, a special shout out to them then. Dr. Tarbetz will be followed tonight by Dr. Shawna M Morgan, who is a poet, scholar, and associate professor of creative writing and Africana literature at the University of Kentucky. Before joining the University of Kentucky, she was tenured on the faculty of English at Howard University, where she taught for several years. Her chapbook, Fear of Dogs and Other Animals, was published by Central Square Press. And tonight she tunes in from Lexington, Kentucky. Hi, Shauna. So great to have you back.
So glad to be here and just very grateful to be in this wonderful company of women. Thank you.
And finally, last but certainly not least, just taking us home tonight will be Saida Agostini, whose first collection of poems, Let the Dead In, was a finalist for the Center of African American Poetry and Poetics 2020 Book Prize, as well as the New Issues Poetry Prize. Excuse me. She's the author of Stunt, which came out in 2020, a chapbook exploring the history of Nellie Jackson, a Black woman entrepreneur who operated a brothel for 60 years in Natchez, Mississippi. Her poetry can also be found in the Black Ladies Brunch Collective's anthology, Not Without Our Laughter, in Barrel House Magazine, Hobart Pulp, Plume, and other publications. And we are popping links for all of the wonderful books by these poets tonight into the chat, so you can check it out there. So thank you so much, poets, and we're going to go ahead and turn it right over to Dr. Betts.
All right, so I wanted to be relevant since this is on class time, but I also wanted to do a little nod to Emily Dickinson. Dickinson was my mother's favorite poet. I did not read Dickinson until I went to an MFA program because I did not want to read my mother's poets. So the poem that I ended up writing about when I was in graduate school was the only poem I ever saw by Dickinson that mentioned an African American. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of how much Dickinson followed current events, and that she was very engaged with following the Civil War and the legacy of slavery. So I wrote an essay about this poem. I have to find the essay, but I think it's a comment on, yes, it could just be someone turning on the light or turning off a light, but I also think it's turning off a light and talking about what it means for someone to escape and what does Black fugitivity look like. So short poem. It was written in 1861 before the end of the Civil War. And there's no title, of course, but the first line contains "The lamp burns sure," and it's number 233. Because, you know, she numbered all the poems. Here we go. The lamp burns sure within. Though serfs supply the oil, it matters not the busy wick at her phosphoric toil. The slave forgets to fill the lamp, burns golden, on, unconscious that the oil is out. And as that, the slave is gone. So I always think about that. I was like, maybe they didn't forget to turn off the lamp. Maybe they were no longer willing to be there to turn it off. My students are also working on sonnets and villanelles right now. So I wanted to read a villanelle that's in the Villanelles anthology, and it's not in a book. So I'm gonna go with that and just make sure I pull the page up correctly. So Damned Multitudes is the name of the poem. Last time I checked, we was damned multitudes. I trashed boxes, hyphens, slashed into parts. Can't sway myself to suit your swaying moods. I'm not sorry, My blood thwarts centrifuge, platelets, plasma, water, red, even sparks. Last time I checked, we was damned multitudes. This is ignored fact, not just attitude. My voices aren't one predictable march. Can't sway myself to suit your swaying moods. Ask Whitman as he penned the lists he wooed to tender pages from trees, dyes, ink, quarks. Last time I checked, we was damn multitudes. Don't ask which cloth I'm cut from, how it's hued with shades of Nickelback, Brooks, blues, and arcs. Can't change myself to suit your swaying moods. If you must know me, ask what deaths unglued me. Check which frosts and blue dawns singed my starts. Last time I checked, we was damn multitudes. Can't change myself to suit your swaying moods. I'm gonna read a couple. I feel like Saida, I love her work so much, and she always makes me want to go back and look at my first book. And my first book, it's out of print now, but it was really when I started to play with poetic form. So I'm gonna read a sonnet in here that's inspired by, in part by Biggie's One More Chance and Brooklyn. So one more chance. What happens when summer thickens with notorious rhymes from Bed-Stuy, when pulse quickens, heavy as thumping bass deep fried? There is a laying of hands on cheeks, more sincere than any bullet. A chorus of chambered muscles speaks in red tandem pairing. A trigger pulled fire our lips and skin into one long streak. My eyelids shudder, then blink. He's trapped in this delicate dance too. I nod and think when the widow chanteuse sings, baby, give me one more chance. And I'm gonna read a couple poems from my last book, and then I'm gonna close with a newer poem. I hope I'm not going over time. Sometimes I read too short, but I'm gonna read a poem. This is a harder poem for me to read because I think we don't talk about domestic violence and how sometimes it's very public violence, right? And this is kind of based in real incidents, something that happened to my mom and how we would talk to each other. Because once you get to be an adult, you kind of have these conversations with your mom, like you empathize with them a little bit more, at least, I'll say that. So this is Circling Unexpectedly. My mother's stories arrive in unexpected stutters, almost like the bus that picks me up after a doctor's appointment. As the bus circles back downtown, it passes my house, just so I could take another bus back to where I need to be. Mama, how often have our lives been that recursive, inexact reflections where we see just a little bit of each other? When I tell you about the sharp throb in my chest that hardens into a knot, you say, my ex did not beat me. My life should be easier. I should know less of the vocabulary of hurt. I was spared a volley of fists, but what if lies are bony knuckles that broadside you? You hear my voice echo yourself. The ache of cold weather in my ankle is the whistle in your limbs as the bus makes a turn. I remember when you called me after you saw a man beat a woman across Court Street in Kankakee, punching her until she fell, a sack of meat and bone, then picking her up to throw her on the blacktop again and again. Your shaking was audible. You called 911. The nightmare of my father is the anvil hanging over you, ready to drop. We never talked about him holding you above his shoulders, a pregnant veil that he threw on the living room carpet. I was the only witness at age 6. We talk about my brothers, how men come and go, school, work, mammograms, acupuncture, travel, a softer utterance of love. We know these lives force us in repeated roundabouts, even as I rewrite the turns, take shortcuts, go straight ahead, aware of what stands behind us both. I'm going to read the title poem from my last book. This is what it looks like. Some people go, oh my God, it's a big spider. And then I'm like, there are scarier things. But this is the title poem, and I ended up writing it after my divorce. And I've been thinking about that, how do you write about that? How do you find these memories and make them not be cliche? And I kept thinking about how we talk about breaking habits, and then this moment where I was staying at a friend's house in Brooklyn across from a methadone clinic. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, a methadone clinic. You go there to break a heroin habit. So then the poem kind of came out of that. But this is called Break the Habit. Before the divorce goes through, your phone finds another ringing frenzy. Your father is propped near death again. Infection sweeps through, a tsunami rocking through his leg, foundation of his formerly unstoppable bones. The doctor wants to take his leg before bacteria can claim its bounty of limbs. He can barely lift arms that often struck and sometimes held you. Your brother calls to carefully unwrap hurts marked fragile. His slow, easy voice like yours, voice you stuffed into anger's armor to protect yourself from jabs, mean mouths, fists, wandering eyes. The jousting has finally slumped you on a friend's couch in Brooklyn. Lolo Jenkins, a cat, knows the body speaks as a comma. Rests his loud, endless purr against your chest. In the soft quiet, behind a locked door, across the street from a methadone clinic, you break the habit of not crying again because the harp inside you strokes into a wave of adamant notes that know you should not be alone. So I guess, I'm doing good on time. Okay, so what I will do, I'll read 2 poems and then I'll be quiet because I want to hear Shauna and Saida, definitely. This is the last poem in Break the Habit, short poem called Go. If you examine the embers of my life, they will be burned to the last. If anything is worth loving, defense rings its resonant siren. Weaponry is an option that boldly blacksmiths the present tender blooming sprout. I seek methods to fortify a steely tense because the heart requires smelting. It wavers in the hungry yellow tongues, little strong licks of heat that echo many hertz. I cannot deny what rocked and kept me, what once made me feel safe, gone now. Ashes, dust, burned, singed, blown to a language that wind and soil must know. This wild whisper runs inside me, and I must answer it, or the rustling of skin shall molt what is left. I will not allow myself to live half a life, so I must go. This last poem is in an anthology called Carving Out Rights from Within the Prison Industrial Complex. I taught poetry at Stateville Prison for about 3 years. And this was one of the poems that kind of came out of that experience. This is called Think, Think. Think about the air invisible as it uncurls a wave of toxins. Think about how its fingertips trace the skin as a baton falls on the flesh merely seconds later. Think about how heavy metals brown the water and we are told to drink. Think about how many of us wonder when the roofs over our heads will be tongues evicted from the languages of home. Think about how every person needs a doctor, but everyone doesn't get one. Think about how savings mean nothing to the crazy fine print circumscribed like obsolete hieroglyphs. Think how law books fall open and hopscotch for anyone who keeps writing checks. Think, like Aretha Franklin belting "What You Trying to Do to Me." Think how the law keeps shuffling the numbers to fit some constant where acknowledging who is human is posited in some philosophy or some mathematical equation that pretends that logic is its function. When blood needs to find something superior, something that denies how human is defined by a much wider net cast by some divine fisherman, or perhaps an African goddess in a gown laced with sea foam, but place markers for faith are constantly moved towards a crucifix. A human can find more than one path, I hope. Think about how every day someone is hoping for some simple thing, like fresh bread, lightly toasted, the ability to walk without pain, a chance to shower, a moment free of fist and jeer, a moment singing victorious, as if we could level the wrongs and leave the world upright like a gospel-drenched woman, singing freedom, freedom after forgiveness, after you change your mind, because you need to think and act to be free. Thank you to everybody, and I hope you enjoy the poetry we're offering tonight.
Tara, oh, that was just beautiful. I can't stop thinking about softer utterances of love. That line is just took my breath away. And I'm just so glad that I was here to hear that poem. So much of it resonated, and I am personally, and I'm often thinking about sort of my place in this world as a Black woman and navigating all of the things that we have to navigate, including the sort of daily violence that we experience of all kinds. So I'm going to start with a poem that was written in memory of Breonna Taylor. It has an epigraph, a line from Toni Morrison's beloved Baby Suggs. In this here place, we flesh that weeps and laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. Ground life. One. Essential. Working hands brown, reach for our wrists, quiet, pulsing, essential, hush, the sound of flesh, a music, corporeal, the body singing, a life, a harmonizing of blood, a trembling. Let us make a place, a provision ground to grow what we can imagine, our bodies in rhyme, the thud of hoe and axe, searching the earth for a place to seed ourselves, root a heart. Breezy, Brianna, deeply loved flesh, a heart, a prize, hands and smile, a mouth for our weeping, for our laughing, ground life shuddering on every street. Let us make a place. Wangalo Wale. 2. All the names we call you, Brianna, all the names you are, we call you. The sorrow songs forever syncopating our pain, breaking free, forcing us to improvise a world without you. We take only our hands to the provision ground, our toiling a backbeat. We clap and shout, we clap and wail, we clap and dig, we clap and harvest, pulling up the sustenance in your name again. Your mama offers her hands and voice, tells us you are everybody's sister, everybody's daughter, a healer, loving our people well, life grounding, touching freedom's floor. Wangalo Huale. 3. The offspring of loss has made a home in our bodies. Our fists clutch, veins push forth. Inside, a plangent song, quaking the ground beneath us, holding every memory of our brie. We have augured a place deeper inside, spirit watering the seeds of memory and peace, the roots of fight and freedom. Go there, love it hard. Brianna o Huale. Ooh, that one's always difficult, but hopeful. You know, imagining ways that we can seed and replant ourselves and remember. I'm going to read a poem from this wonderful, wonderful anthology, Where We Stand, Poems of Black Resilience, edited by Melanie Henderson Enzo, Ceylon Surin, and Truth Thomas. And I'm just so grateful to have been included. Perpetual Winter. Even as we march towards spring, there is no letting up. Children are playing outside, clumping their feet, looking to step where it is safe. Their laughter invites others, and a snowball fight ensues. Hand grenades of winter sail between trees, some reaching their targets, exploding into squeals. Lights flash across my face, forcing their way past our curtains. No one sees the patrol car until black boots reach the pavement and hot yellow streams run and mark the snow at her feet. Lips now trembling, she looks towards home, does not know she must not run. I never told her not to. On the insides of my arms, blue thumbprint bruises still hold me long afterwards. The sky, another uniform above us, a final lesson on dirt and flowers and snow. I think I'm going to read a couple poems. That one was I wrote for my daughter. We had an encounter with the police one spring with late snow. And I'm always thinking about raising my children, growing them in this space, and just, you know, I always think of Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and all the ways that Black women endure and make a way. And so I'm going to read a poem, another poem from my twin daughters. Growing and Weeding. I've always lived in the midst of things that grew faster than I. My mother's white roses, our coulis plum tree, my cousin Charmaine, whose breasts appeared overnight and sent me to the bathroom, pressing my arms against my chest. I tried to grow things too. A young chicken fallen from the Caribbean broiler's truck, my sister's cherry tree, thyme in the Virginia winter, a jade plant from the Baxter brothers who were not brothers at all, a white dendrobium that flowered once. When I wondered why things tended to die, he said it was me, that I killed everything green, especially money. But today I remembered how I grew things, how I cared for African violets, never letting water touch the velvet leaves, how the purple flowers would burst and burst. I birthed children, 2 at once, and grew them in a garden of heirloom tomatoes and yellow gladioli. Today, I will plant raspberry bushes for summer, and soon dahlias, giant sunflowers, and moonshine yarrow for the vase in our kitchen. The children and I will harvest black crim and zucchini, picking gungo peas and cut ripe honeydew from our new vines, weeding as we go. So I'm a gardener and I love to grow things. I grew up on a farm in Jamaica, and I'm always thinking about sustenance, right? The idea of what we call ground provisions, our grown food in Jamaica, right? And how sort of my US American context sometimes challenges the way that I think about sustenance for myself. So I'm often thinking about that. So this poem sort of reaches back to that, to my home in Jamaica. This is called Molasses. Them tell me said the birthing did hard. Life torn from my mother who squatted in the dirt back against the trunk of a soursop tree, the one she often stole away to, drawing circles in the soft ground, calling up root weevils when her fingers were a plaid of sugar-caned skin and blood. There they found me, mounted on her left breast, suckling death, covered in sex and a vernix of ghosts, her hands holding my back, navel string still itchan, tie up in her. My mother never knew what the rainbow mean. She was buried along with my most beautiful scars, the afterbirth always beckoning me home to witness the memories of old folk, their songs and stories marking my flesh, echoing something my bones find familiar, a chord that reverberates through my hips and thighs. She come down fast like fire in a cane piece, they say. Always turmoil in what they tell, and I cannot be sure if they're speaking of my birth or what my mother endured growing me between rows of cane, light brown child pressing against her molasses, a bitter confection made with indelicate hands. Right, I want to be mindful of the time as well. So I will close with two poems, Paper Boats. The sparkle of the bathers' bodies disappears behind the rainbow of wooden shops. The yellow one leaning near the river belongs to a woman who sells fried fish and festival. She glances at the little racing boats chased by the little boys who made them. They go quickly, bumping into round stones until they reach the crowd of people taking pictures of Pum Rock. Some men cross the river and slip between the labia of the stone wall. They laugh and the little boats pass and go faster where the river bends. The boys rush to throw stones and try to sink each other's boats. The woman turns her festivals over and over as she watches the men and the little boys with the little paper boats. If you've been to Jamaica, in the gorge, there is a rock formation that looks exactly like the female genitalia. And so that poem is from that space. This is, I'll close with Omi Adura. This is the water prayer. We are standing at the shore. It could be Adelaide, first free village, Salvador or Varadero, Ferry Hill, or anywhere the Caribbean reaches for the sorrowful Atlantic. Our faces turn up to receive the sharp caress of the wind. We fill our nostrils with salted air and walk into waves, breaking gently at our ankles. Hand in hand and slowly swaying our bodies into the uprising of the sea, we step over sea stars and urchin, follow the path of conch and spirit, life force of our ancestors. She pulls us, swirls around as we sink ourselves down to our necks, water across our shoulders, washing us, lapping up to kiss our lips. We submerge, wash our torn selves clean and new, cry out to all our mothers, to Yemanja, we are her children too, like fish feeding all directions. Thank you all so much.
Hello. I am just like so honored and excited to be here with y'all and to be here with Tara and Shauna. Like, this is just like, it feels like a party. It does, like a party in a weird hotel room, but it's a party nonetheless. So I'm super excited to be here with y'all. I've been doing this like tradition of like starting readings with a new poem. And I felt this new poem was actually very on theme. It's called Anita Hill Responds to Ginny Thomas's Request for an Apology. And so for context, Ginny Thomas is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And a few years ago, Ginny called and left a voicemail asking Anita to apologize. And so I decided that I would take it upon myself to ghostwrite Anita's apology for her, as one does. So here we go. Anita Hill responds to Ginny Thomas's request for an apology. I am so tired, Ginny. To say I think of you requires an energy I can't often summon. Being as black and beautiful as I am means I was reared to see my life as a lesson to others. I am a case study of the supreme. I could say something about me nettles as I would name an errant bee, mosquito, or bird, but that feels like a disrespect even in my mouth and all it holds. You and I know my body occupies a more vast real estate in your mind than your flaccid husband ever could. I am no fool. My forebears worked your people's fields. The beat of their shuck and jive is mine. If I let you eat me alive, you call me your own. Put my picture up on a wall below your ancestors and say, she's a nice gal. There are times I wish I never said anything. Let the truth be a private country that I can trade for an untold kingdom. But then I think of your face, scrunched up the color of curdled milk, red and screaming for an America of your own creation, the pastoral dream of a confederacy where Clarence hides up your ugly, graceless skirt, clothed in rough gingham, a silent acolyte grateful for safe harbor, while I tremble before the genteel violence of your hands, and bitch please comes out my mouth like fresh cream, hot from the passage through my full throat, cradled by my tongue, lawless and unmistakable. I'm also here to offer my services as a ghostwriter for others seeking apologies in moments of audacity as well. So I wanted to kind of share this next poem just because I really do love, I think, honoring the audacity of Black women and all the ways in which we hold audacity ourselves as like a practice, not just of survival, but for freedom and liberation, right? And so, you know, when I think about audacity, one of the people that I naturally think about is my great grandmother who passed away almost at the age of 103 in England. And the way that she got to England is my great granny was an amazing cook. And she was seeing a beau in Guyana, which is located in South America, and his name was Mr. Chin. Now, Mr. Chin was very skinny, but as he ate food prepared at my great granny's table, he got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so after several years of being together, someone mentioned to my grandmother something he neglected to share was that he got married and was actually living now on the other side of town with his new wife. So great granny, being who she was, decided to leave not just the relationship, not just the country, but was like, you know what, I'm going to leave and move to England and not tell him. So I wrote a poem that is great granny's letter to Mr. Chin. It's called Lillian Carter Starts a Letter to a Former Philandering Lover, London, 1963. My dear Mr. Chin, it could be supposed any sensible woman would stay. A man cheats as quick as they breathe. Here, a big egg yellow gal with scant hair and thrall, lovesick, I was a machine for your punishment. Forced, I see it now, sir. And yes, those nights we spent roving in bed, the Guyana dark calling and calling so sweet, the pastor, your chest, my thighs, the choir, two great fat bodies collided with the force of desire. If pushed to confess, I loved it when you reared up in pleasure and screamed, glory, glory. After a lifetime of angry, brutish men, I found you, a sort of black paradise, everything else left behind save my son. I prepared a daily feast of hallelujahs to lay at your feet, I, a panting forest, as you ate. Hear me cry so lonesome and wild to this white man's God for a little plot of half pleasure. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. So the other poem that I want to share with you is one of, I guess they're all my favorites. It always feels a little bit when I talk about whether or not a poem is my favorite, that like I'm talking about a playlist I wrote. I wrote it. I love it. I think it's genius. But this is a special favorite. It's called Two Fat Black Women Are Making Love. And the joke is right there, ready, shuddering, and alive, rife with promise. There are so many paths that have been outworn for a quick, easy laugh. Tyler Perry strutting with a gun and wig, screaming rotund and loud like a Medea would. Martin calling out your mama on television, or the meme of a young woman shot underhand, her belly in love with a tight skirt, hands moving towards an open mouth. Look at everything she devours. Imagine it. Does it make you hungry too? Two fat Black women are making love on a bed on the floor, and they are weeping for joy. They are crying, great folds of flesh, flushing and shaking. One cannot look in the mirror save for thinking of her daddy. All this ugly and skin together counts the men who say they hate her body as they do bitter cops and dead Black boys. Two fat Black women are making love, and they touch each other like they can hold it. Honeyed, profane body, like patriots, like their bodies have never been folded into freezers, screamed at on streets, coaxed or threatened, sweet, like they have names, like we will know them. So the next poem I'm going to read, and folks, please let me know about time, because I like to argue that it's a cultural tradition of running late. But I think that just might be me being trifling. So I don't want to take away from the really exciting conversation that we're going to have. This is called Adventures of the Third Limb. I want to call our cock Chocolate Thunder. Tammy thinks I've lost my mind. I see our cock as a Blaxploitation heroine, resplendent in the finest of neon spandex, draped in golden chains and a velvet cape, stiff and resolution to kick any jive turkey punk motherfucker ass into submission. Our cock has framed pictures of Prince on the wall and listens to Dion Estes to show her sensitive side. She is fluent in 7 languages, drinks Dos Equis, can paint, sing gospel, praise dance, and is head usher at the Church of Dynamic Discipleship. Our cock is the Renaissance stick. And if you are looking at her sideways, bitch, what has your cock done for you lately? Our cock doesn't hide when company comes, stalks out but naked in sequin pumps, shining with lube, sits spread-eagled on the dinner table and says embarrassing shit about things she would do to Kerry Washington. And when everyone else leaves and only the 3 of us are left, all limbs and laughter, she pulls me and Tammy closer, our pussies climbing up her veined girth. This is how we fit together, loud, tight and eager, our wails, her composition, agitated aching notes, excessio and broken chords. In the studio later with Smokey outfitted in a double-breasted Stacey Adams suit, matching gaiters, pinky ring, and straw Panama hat, she'll share a blunt and then play cruisin' while talking shit about how hard we came and the scent of wet. But in that moment, oh, my love. So I'm going to close out on this last poem. So mermaids play a really huge role in my family's mythology, and mermaids are also called water babies in Guyana. I actually have a family member who claims they were kidnapped by a mermaid. So I decided I should write about that. It's called The Mermaid Speaks. Everything they have said is true. Everything they have said is true. I have eaten men as you would a tangerine, thoughtlessly, reverently, juice smeared about my mouth. Perhaps you would blame me, call me bloodthirsty along with the rest of my kin, the Kanaima, the Olhaig, even the Mazaruni, roused up a gang of the young, stupid on palm wine to come and stake me. And I laugh as surely as you weep on my shores. This ownership, you will forgive me, I took it as the Dutch did your children. Your forebears came on the same hunt after I ate another man. Your granddaddy, forgive me, he was lovely. Ripe copper skin warmed with the sun, singing among the white lotus as if he could charm the roots of trees into fealty. I remember weeping with my sisters below in our city. Maybe he wept too. It's been so long, I can't be sure, and there is nothing I want to pretend with you. So I did what was impossible, swam up, struggling past the pleas of my own mother, burst through the Pomeroon and beseeched him into my arms. Yes, I say begged without shame. You know the men of your blood, what they can drive you to do. And forward he came, fearful of drowning, dancing into my naked red arms. And when I ate him, he urged me on, saying with delight as my teeth met the cradle of his flesh. I have heard his wife crying at our shores, hands tethered to her children, dragging them to and fro as if her love could raise them. The fishermen say she went mad with grieving. Is this true? Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow. Can we just take a moment to applaud or thank you all so much for this feast. That's the only way I can describe it is a feast, is a feast. So let's talk for a bit.
Can I just say something real quick? Okay, to all my students who joined us, I know our class time is over now. If you have to leave, you're gonna miss the discussion, but thank you. I'm really glad I got to share this reading with Shauna and Saida. And if you have questions next week, we'll talk about it.
I love that. This is a learning moment. I love it right now. This is what we're talking about. This is real writer's life. Okay, so how are y'all feeling after that? I'd like to just get like a quick round, like a round of impressions. One word, one line. How are y'all feeling after what you just heard?
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Inspired.
Energized.
Energized. Yes, indeed. Indeed. I am overflowing right now is how I'm feeling. I'm like, whoop, let me not spill. it's so much. Okay, so I'm going to start at the point of joy. I'm going to enter with joy and beauty and ask all of you how you enter and exit your writing when it comes to beauty and joy. So when you're talking about beauty and joy, so I'm thinking of this as almost a vocabulary of love, right? Tara said, man, she had a line in there. She said a vocabulary of hurt that just stayed with me, right? So, but we're gonna start with joy and beauty and a vocabulary of love. So, how do you enter and exit joy and beauty in your work?
Entering and exiting joy and
Because you got to get in there, right? And then once
right.
you're in there, how do you get out?
I kind of feel like entering it feels like I have to really think about things that make me happy
Mhm.
and what makes me playful. Cause I'm, you know, I'm serious, I'm all business, but I'm also the neighbor lady who will go out on my porch and blow bubbles in the middle of the day because I just can't be serious all the time. And I will invent these moments of play for myself. And I think sometimes when I'm trying to catch ideas for poems, because that's what it feels like. It feels like fishing. Sometimes you don't get anything,
Mhm.
sometimes you don't. And then it's almost like when you catch it, it's being that close observer and then being able to say, oh, that's it. And then you just go. And sometimes I catch it and I get the whole poem. Sometimes I get a line, but realizing that it's like something unique and it's a singular kind of experience in that.
Mhm.
But exiting, I don't know. It's so fleeting. I don't know if I exit it. I feel like it goes on its own.
Yeah, where does it go? Where does it go? Does it stay within you? Is it released outward once you've done that?
I mean, I hope so. I hope it
Mhm.
goes somewhere.
Mhm.
And, you know, sometimes my friends tell me I'm funny. I don't think I'm funny in poems.
Mhm.
So maybe that's where my other outlet for joy is me being irreverent in real life.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting when you, as I've been thinking about this reading, I just keep getting the image of fireflies, like the first time, the first day in the year when
Yeah.
you see them, and with that childlike sense of wonder. That's what phosphorescence makes me think about. And so I just got this image of you with the ideas in that way, right? It's like a flash. You described it as fishing, but also it's like this flash that you're trying to catch
Mhm.
in this bottle that's just going to glow, right? So I guess once the light is there, it's there. It's illuminated and you've done what you have to do. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Saida or Shauna, how do you approach beauty and joy in your work?
Well, I mean, I guess like what I would say is I feel like my most beautiful and powerful when I feel joyful, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like, so that could be like I'm in a really dope outfit or these calf hair leopard print boots that I just got that I feel very happy about, right? But it's also like the energy that I feel like when I feel connected and when I feel like I don't have to put up a front and I can
Mm-hmm.
just be who I am rather than trying to like cut myself to make myself palatable or figure out how to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think how that enters into my work is that the reality is that, real talk, I don't get paid to be a poet, right? I mean, like I do this because like I love it, right? Like I can't thrive off of like what I make as a poet. And so if there's ever a space like where I just need to be joyful, that's it, right? Like I get to write the random things like let the world be like my pussy or like get to imagine like what my great grandmother would have said to like this man. And I think like that's like what I think poetry basically is a portal for me
Mm-hmm.
into that joy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Poetry is the
Yeah,
portal.
I love that idea of poetry as the portal, because I don't know if I've ever sort of consciously gone looking for joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because and in many ways I don't, I'm thinking and there are poems, there's sometimes I find myself writing and something joyful emerges, but it's never sort of on its own, right? There's always a layer of something else that's not joyful that lives with it, and so maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm having a difficult time with this question, because yeah, in some, I think I hear joy, I can feel joy, I can identify joy, whether that is, the squeal of my son or a new tomato on my vine.
Mm-hmm.
um and I know when I'm in it, but I don't think I ever really exit. I think it's something that you ask about how it's, if it stays, and I think
Mm-hmm.
once it's there, I can feel it inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's why I was kind of like, it's like fishing. It feels elusive. Like you
Yeah.
don't know when it's gonna pop up. And
Mm-hmm.
so when it does, you're like, and I love that. you know, it makes you more appreciative of it too, I think.
Fireflies, man. Magic. Beautiful. Okay, so then of course you've got to balance it out, right? So then how do you enter the hurt? Tara talked about the vocabulary of hurt, and you all certainly do address hurt in your work in a lot of different ways too, like right out in the world. Shawna, you talk about the difficulties specifically in what it is like to live in the world as a Black woman, you know, all of the hurts that we face and that we balance and on a regular basis. But also, I find it interesting that all of you talk about these intimate hurts. All of you have themes of domestic violence in your work that you take on. You go into very intimate spaces and talk about like family dynamic. So how do you enter the hurt? And then the question is, then do you exit the hurt, or what happens once you have entered the hurt?
I would say for me,
Go ahead.
I feel like the hurt has become transformed in
Mm-hmm.
some ways. You know, so I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. And, you know, I had this day a few years ago where I realized I'd nearly been killed in my abusive relationship. I was like 23 years old. And I had a day that I realized it had been 10 years since that day, right, that I nearly died. And I started weeping with joy, right? Because I think for me, like the only way I was able to survive that moment is I couldn't call it what it was, right? And so, not to be corny, but like there's a joy in naming things, right? And so like for me to be able to like come to this place of like being able to track family history, being able to understand my family, not just like as a child to parents or as a child to my elders, my ancestors, but understand like these are people who are real humans that have been carrying and wrestling with hurts that are vast and beyond my own comprehension for generations, and that they sacrificed and suffered, sometimes wrongly, you know, to help me be free. Like I am an openly Black queer woman who is a poet, and I am these things because the people who came before me wrestled with their hurt enough so I could live and thrive. And I think that makes me approach my hurt in different ways than I would have before.
Beautiful.
I think, sorry, I think the hurt thing for me, I think it comes out, one, I have a very deep desire to tell the truth, sometimes to my detriment. But I've often felt like, and it's kind of one of the things I've taught students often too, is if you tell the truth, it's a thing you're not afraid of anymore. So there's a lot of things I'm not afraid of in the same way as I used to be. And then also too, I'm kind of glad we're in this moment, because more often than not, when we talk about our pain, we talk about being resilient and surviving. And I'm like, when do we get a chance to talk about, okay, we know these things happen, but I deserve to be gentle. I deserve to have softness. I deserve tenderness. I deserve those little things that make everything feel like thriving is possible, right? And so I tend to think about it like that, like what took away your softness and how do you get it back, right? So for me, that's one of the things I find myself kind of asking when I write a poem too.
So profound.
Yeah, that resonates so much. And I hadn't, you know, when I think of my hurt, I don't think of entering it. I think I'm always standing in it. No, it's always present in some way. And Tara, that, you know, that truth telling, I think is a kind of internal and personal truth telling, you know, a sort of refusal to deny, you know, that experience. And so I can easily find my way in a poem. I think the challenge is getting through that in the poem, you know. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from an audience member. Thank you for a wonderful reading. I'm a teacher in a Chinese university teaching American literature. My students, after my lecture of Dickinson, told me reading poems is so difficult. Any gateway or any recommendation for reading poems? How did you start understanding the beauty of poetry and then start your own reading?
I mean, I started teaching when I was young. I was in my early 20s, and I was still cool to my students then. Uh, and I think part of it was I try, and I still try, to think about what are poems that touch on things that they would find compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do a lot of work with hip hop in terms of thinking about that. And now, and also too, like, who are poets that come out of a cultural experience that they know and understand, and not just like, okay, if I have Dominican students, we are going to look at Dominican poets like Pedro Mir, or if I have students who are Puerto Rican, we're going to look at Willie Perdomo or Sandra Maria Esteves. We'll probably be like, okay, what are like cultural touchstones for you? Do you like to skate? Do you like to break dance? Do you like stickers? Do you like whatever their random kind of cultural interests are? I try to think about that in terms of how can that be the subject of a poem? How all of those things are valid too, and much, much more, because you can write a poem about anything,
I agree with you so much, Tara. And I, in my years of teaching, that was like a core pillar. You can write a poem about anything. And I would definitely say often the best way to get people interested in reading poems is to start by having them write poems. So often the way we approach poetry is we say, this is poetry. It's like this sacred thing. And then these are these sacred people who write these sacred things. And you read Emily Dickinson and now go write something like brilliant and prolific, right? So if you start instead from the writing, and then reading these other poets is about a person who engaged in a process of creativity just like you did to write your own poem, I think that kind of changes the perspective on it, right? It makes it a bit more, and makes you even more willing to maybe try to go in and unlock things inside, because you understand that that was literally just a person who was trying to create a moment for you, right? And so you're like you're following it along. So if they can see the process in the work, I think it makes it more interesting than just saying poetry is important, you should read it because it is.
Yeah, I used to tell my first year students, poetry is life. You put on your clothes,
Yes.
you fix your hair, you fix a plate, you walk down the street, poetry is everything and all around us.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so we have 1 minute, and I have a question I just really want to ask, because it's spring and it's Emily Dickinson and you all write about nature. So the big question, we're now at the vocabulary of spring. What of seeding and planting? Okay, whatever that means to you in life or in your work or both. What of seeding and planting?
I think if you're a poet, you're always seeding. You're always putting new words together or thinking through things in your brain and planting potential for new projects. At least that's how I've been doing with my own writing. But I think the thing I'm also excited about, because I'm in an herbal apprenticeship program where we're studying plants at the Urban Growers Collective in Chicago, and just learning how some plants are responding not just to the environment and what's in the soil and what's in the air and in the water, but they respond to us, right? Like that if you start to engage with plants in a different way, they're going to feed and heal you in some ways, because it's almost like plants are intuitive, like when you think about a mycelial network, right? Other plants will help the plants and their family survive through their root systems and communicate with each other. So I think poems do that. I think writers can do that for each other. I think readers can do that for writers. It's like we're forming this very delicate ecological balance that keeps language alive. So yeah, for me,
Indeed.
it's an extended metaphor that goes beyond pretty plants.
That's what that mycelial network you described, the literary one, is what landed us here right now.
It sure
Today,
is.
right? That's what it is.
Yes.
That's why it's so important to be intentional about participating in community. And when you have the opportunity to meet people, you meet these people tonight, that's an opportunity, that's a seed planting. Okay, so I'm going to ask Shawna and Saida the same question. You can chime in also, Tara, real quick. The last concept I forgot to add on there is blooming. We did seeding and planting, so how y'all blooming? Okay, let's rephrase how y'all blooming. We're going to end on a note of blooming.
Well, I love this question. Thank you so much. I just love getting in the dirt. I grow, I weed, I plant, and hope for the bloom. And Saida and I met at the watering hole in South Carolina.
Beautiful.
And this has been a beautiful watering here. And I think things like this make me bloom. This is a blooming, a space like this, and having the opportunity to spend time together and hear each other. Yeah, that's my answer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shawna.
And I mean, when I think about seeding, planting, and blooming, what I think about is reveling, right? Like, I'm like so excited, right? Like, so I'm in New York City for work right now. And like, I'm literally going home tonight to see my wife, right? And like, so just thinking about like, oh, I'm gonna get to go and like be with this woman that I love, right? Makes me bloom, right? Next week, I'm gonna go and get to see my mommy, get to like be with like my friends and my family. And like, when I think about building that harvest, all I just think about is like, just being in love.
Yes.
Blooming is pretty like that.
Yeah.
And exciting. Like I had gotten coffee right before I came up here today. And it's cold in Chicago today. It's like 40 something degrees. And there was this tree and it had, I think it was a cherry blossom tree. It had 2 blossoms on it, on the whole tree. And I just stopped with my coffee. My friend's like, what are you doing? I said, look. And they're like, what? I said, look, there's 2 blossoms. Everything else is a closed bud. And I kind of feel like that's how I get excited when the poem really hits. Like I see it on the page and I know it's there. Then I'm like, you know, it feels like that kind of similar excitement to me.
Here's to those 2 blossoms. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Brooke and to everyone who has joined us. And speaking of blooming, the books of these authors, I highly recommend that you get them in the garden of your bookshelf. I'm going to pass it over to Brooke. Thank you so much for having me. And it was wonderful, as always, to be in conversation with all you beautiful poets.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll be thinking about that mycelial network of poets for many, many months to come, I think. And I was thinking a little bit that it can stretch over time too, right? From Emily Dickinson to all of us. And I love, Shawna, what you said about daily life is the stuff of poetry. And that's certainly something we try to interpret at the Emily Dickinson Museum, where Emily led her daily life and wrote her poems. So, and we like to, we hope that when people come to visit us, they can take away the idea that that they too, you know, can find that spark in their daily life. So thank you so much. It's just been a marvelous and fabulous evening. This is National Poetry Month, by the way. April is drawing to a close, and I can't think of a better way to have concluded National Poetry Month than to be here with all of you. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of our audience for tuning in. And you can find the books, as Lisa Pegram has said, in the chat. There are links there. And you have been listening to Dr. Tara Betts, Dr. Shawna M Morgan, and Saida Agostini with our guest host, fabulous guest host tonight, Lisa Pegram. Thank you once again, everybody. We hope that you will join us next month for our May Phosphorescence reading, which will feature Quentin Collins, Meg Kearney, and Denise Lowe. And then just before that, on May 14th, you can join us for our annual poetry walk, which commemorates Dickinson's death in 1886. We always do an event each year around that time. This year, it'll be a virtual walk around Amherst and conclude with a lighthearted toast. We would love to see you there. We're putting links in the chat for those as well. So to learn more about those programs, or to sign up for our monthly mailing, or to make a donation, you can visit us at emilydickinsonmuseum.org. Until we see you again, we hope you take really good care of yourself and of each other. Thank you so much, and good night. Thank you, Tara, Shauna, Lisa, Saida. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everybody.